simplifying the complex. At PowerPlan, that's what we do. Plain and simple, we help make your life easier. With PowerPlan, accounting, tax, finance, operations, IT, and regulatory departments get the clarity in financial and operational data they need to make decisions that improve overall organizational performance. PowerPlan was started based on a simple premise. We know that the more fixed assets a company has, the more challenging it is to manage them financially and keep up with ever-changing rules and regulations, all while planning for tomorrow. Key questions like, how many assets are you being taxed on that are no longer your assets? How hard is it to keep up with multiple financial spreadsheets across multiple departments? Can you be sure your organization is compliant with recent regulatory changes? All can be a challenge if you don't have the detailed level of information you need. PowerPlan's award-winning software answers these questions by leveraging data from your ERP, EAM, and other financial systems to create a single, highly detailed platform, giving you real-time access to granular data across the organization that helps departments make better decisions. For more than 25 years, PowerPlan has helped asset-intensive businesses optimize their financial performance and achieve regulatory compliance. PowerPlan manages the interfaces between all sources of transactions, thus allowing key decision-makers to see the same set of data through different lenses. With this clarity comes confidence. PowerPlan empowers companies to make optimal decisions for their overall strategy by putting financial data at the fingertips of anyone across the organization based on their role at any time, allowing everyone to be on the same virtual page. From Fortune 1000s to local entities, today we help more than 300 companies across multiple industries meet regulatory compliance and strategically plan for the future. Customers come to us and stay with us because of our ability to provide them clarity and confidence. That is what PowerPlan can bring to your organization. PowerPlan. We make the complex simple.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Kuhn, president of the Edison Electric Institute. Welcome back to Day 2 of EEI 2020, a virtual leadership summit. I hope you were able to be with us for Day 1 yesterday, but if not, please visit our virtual conference center, where you will find all the content archived for your viewing convenience. Before we begin, I want to pause and recognize the sponsors of this session, Oracle Utilities and POWERPLAN. Their generous support helps make this possible. Please visit our sponsor wall for more details. We have a terrific political conversation just moments away. But first, we have the important task of presenting the annual EEI Edison Awards. This is our industry's highest honor. It is given to recognize distinguished leadership, innovation, and advancement of the electric industry. The first Edison Award was given in 1922, and the international category was added in 1994. Earlier this year, our reviewers examined dozens of nominations, and we ended up with the 5 domestic and 2 international finalists shown on the screen. All the projects were innovative, which made this a tough call for our judging panel of retired EEI chairmen. In the end, they selected 1 domestic and 2 international companies as this year's winners. In the U.S. category, our winner is the Southern Company. Southern reached a major milestone last year. They launched their Energy Storage Research Center, an industry first. This facility will serve as an industry-wide hub for battery storage testing, evaluation, and large-scale demonstration. The center already has contributed to the Georgia Power and Alabama Power smart neighborhoods. Here's a brief video that tells it all.
So research and development is strategically important to Southern Company. We have a long history of research. We started focused in environmental research, and through the years we've added other strategic areas of importance. We see energy storage as a technology that has the potential to change the way that we make, move, and sell electricity throughout the grid, and we see the value that that can bring back to our customers. R&D is the way that we do that. Innovation is core to our business and core to who we are as a company.
We're learning so much with all of our field deployment systems. From the Energy Storage Research Center behind me to the Smart Neighborhood Project, we're getting real-world data and validating energy storage performance.
So our goal for energy storage research is really about equipping the company to ready for the implementation of energy storage. We want to gain the knowledge and the expertise and the tools to be able to implement that safely, affordably for our customers, and integrate it into the grid.
It's important for us to look at all different types of energy storage, whether it's near-term deployments of lithium-ion batteries or long-term deployments of flow batteries. These different technologies will enable a more flexible grid.
In R&D, we utilize what we call the portfolio approach. We look at the problem, try to understand where the gaps are in technology currently, and then lay out a roadmap. And so we may be talking with 20 academic technologies, then 10 vendors, but then we may test 2 in the field to really understand how this technology is going to impact our business.
When I think of the future of energy storage, I see many of the barriers that inhibit storage being removed, and I see a smarter grid with longer and short duration scale energy storage systems deployed at customer homes and at utility sites.
We see a much different grid than we have today. We see a widespread deployment of EVs along with renewable generation, a lot of batteries in our homes with electric transportation, but also a lot of variable generation on the grid. Managing load, managing the appliances in your home, managing the electric vehicles. That coupled with renewables and storage are going to move us down that path towards net zero. And that's just the start of where we're going to be.
Accepting on behalf of Southern Company is CEO Tom Fanning.
On behalf of more than 28,000 employees across the Southern Company system, It is my pleasure to accept the 2020 Edison Award. Let me say how grateful we are to receive the electric power industry's most prestigious honor. I want to thank Tom Kuhn and everybody at EEI, as well as the distinguished panel of judges who participated in this year's selection process. We are so proud to represent this great industry and to personify what this award represents: distinguished leadership, innovation, and contribution to the advancement of the electric industry for the benefit of all. For more than 5 decades, Southern Company's research and development team has led industry innovation to deliver more value to customers. The organization has become a model for ingenuity and collaboration aimed at solving the industry's most pressing challenges. Today, our R&D efforts are focused on decarbonization and our dual goals of a 50% reduction in GHG emissions by 2030 and net zero operations by 2050. In fact, we expect to meet our first goal as early as 2025, and we're exploring ways to accelerate our 2050 goal. As we prepare Southern Company to succeed in the transition to a net zero carbon future, the Storage Research Center and other energy storage pilot demonstrations, including the Georgia Power and Alabama Power Smart Neighborhoods, we are providing leadership and technical expertise to advance energy storage as an effective, technically viable energy solution. This facility serves as an industry-wide destination for battery energy storage technology testing, evaluation, and large-scale demonstration. We know the future will require storage across a broad range of capacity and duration. So our activities are targeting integrated storage at affordable costs via emerging technologies, while also supporting the deployment of large grid-scale lithium-ion battery systems. I continue to be confident that we're well positioned to meet the needs of our customers, our employees, our communities, and our investors well into the future. This is certainly a wonderful honor, and it really is humbling to receive this kind of recognition. To everyone across Southern Company who worked to make these projects successful, and to the thousands more who make thousands of good decisions every day, thank you for your work. I'm so proud to accept this award on your behalf.
Thank you, Tom. Let's move now to our international winners. First, I call on ATCO for their Alberta power line. This 500 kV transmission project is a major achievement in the face of challenging environmental conditions in Canada. And it is also a model for engaging with and investing in local Indigenous communities. Let's look at a very short video.
As I reflect on the challenges Canada's facing today with large linear infrastructure, I think the Fort McMurray West 500 kV project stands out as a significant project. A lot of people that maybe wouldn't recognize the challenges with building across the northern Alberta landscape, but incredible logistics challenges, large tracts of muskeg, and so construction periods are broadly limited to winter frozen conditions. There are really interesting and important wildlife species in the terrain, and so we did some very innovative construction techniques in order to ensure we didn't have a negative impact on these caribou herds. We engaged with Indigenous communities that we here at ATCO have had a long-standing relationship with. That engagement led to meaningful work opportunities through the project.
We're really looking into different economic opportunities, especially with diversity. All we really have now is oil and gas, but we have so many renewable projects coming up, and with this partnership with the APL, it was that tremendous, perfect timing. So it really gave our First Nation an opportunity to invest in our future.
I think it's important because I think every nation has their own unique needs, and a lot of those needs require capital and economic development, and this is a great opportunity to exercise that with a reputable industry partner such as ATCO and Canadian Utilities.
For me, it really was the relationships and the partnership, and we had a significant role in working with local communities, Indigenous communities, landowners. We really solidified the relationship with Quanta, and we here at ATCO are incredibly proud of what our teams have been able to accomplish as they really came together in the project.
Accepting on behalf of ATCO is Mr. Wayne Stansby, Executive Vice President.
Thank you, Tom. I'm Wayne Stansby, and I'm so very honored to accept this award on behalf of the countless women and men who worked so hard to make Alberta Power Lines such a success. More than 6 years ago, we set out to accomplish something truly remarkable: to develop, design, finance, construct, and operate the longest 500 kV AC transmission line in Canada, across some of the world's most difficult terrain and in its most challenging climate. And we didn't stop there. In keeping with our deeply held values, we ensured the safety of our people, we protected the environment, and we made a positive and lasting difference for communities along the route. At the end of the day, Alberta Power Line was successful thanks to the significant contributions of many, many people and partners. I'd like to thank the Alberta Electric System Operator for their continued collaboration, the many landowners, community groups, and Indigenous communities who shared their knowledge and perspectives with us, the commercial purchasers, including Greystone Managed Investments and IST3 Investment Foundation, and the 7 Indigenous communities who purchased an equity ownership. The Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, the Big Stone Cree Nation, Gun Métis Local 55, Mikisew Cree First Nation, the Paul First Nation, the Sawridge First Nation, and the Sucker Creek First Nation. I would also like to thank the many, many dedicated project teams from across ATCO and Quanta Services who worked tirelessly on Alberta Power Line through each phase of the project. And last, and definitely not least, to our partners, Quanta Services, who we're continuing to work closely with to transform the electricity system here in Puerto Rico, where you found me today, through our newly formed company, Luma Energy. The Edison Award is truly the highest honor that can be bestowed upon a company in the electricity sector. And for us, this is extra special as it's our second time receiving the award following our win back in 2005 for the Whitefish Dover Transmission Project. We're humbled to once again be selected for this very prestigious award and to be recognized amongst such notable company. Thank you, and we look forward to our continued collaboration with EEI in the years to come.
I am equally proud of our second international winner, CIE. Just a few years ago, just 1 in 4 households in the Ivory Coast had access to electricity. Thanks to CIE's Electricity for All, designed specifically for low-income households, more than half of the nation's households now enjoy electric power. As we all know, it's impossible to overstate the societal benefits that come with electricity. CIE hopes to accelerate this mission to reach 90% of households by 2025. Here is a brief video that tells the story.
CIE base in the early morning. A CIE team prepares their daily equipment for providing electrical connections under the PEPT, the Electricity for All program. This state-sponsored program is specifically aimed at low-income households. With little access to banking services, these peri-urban and rural communities can now have electricity, thanks to a service that is within their means. Direction Poor Boy 2. On the agenda, supplying power to a group of 20 homes wishing to benefit from the Electricity for All program. For greater efficiency, the procedures have been streamlined. Each applicant must build a niche near a power line to secure the equipment, provide a copy of their identity papers, as well as ownership titles and rental agreement of the property. Then each household will receive a supply of electricity, a smart prepayment meter, and an indoor installation kit for units of 1 to 3 rooms. The cost of the operation for the client is around 150,000 FCFA. The Electricity for All program has already won over nearly 800,000 beneficiaries since its official launch.
On vous remercie beaucoup d'avoir un bon projet pour les pauvres. Ça, c'est pour les pauvres.
Ça me permet de faire économie pour faire une autre activité encore après.
Avec le courant, on est là jusqu'à 22h, 23h. Ça dépend de moi-même. Je suis fatigué, je rentre.
J'arrive à travailler sans problème. Il n'y a pas de souci, franchement, je suis à l'aise.
Aujourd'hui, chacun a son compteur. C'est comme s'il est libéré.
Un seul compteur pour tout un quartier. C'était compliqué pour la répartition des factures. On arrive même à conserver de la nourriture pour des jours. Donc, madame est libre, la casse est comme elle le veut.
L'enfant a maintenant l'ordinateur, l'enfant a maintenant vraiment tout ce qui est technologie.
Ça permet aux enfants de s'épanouir, de pouvoir étudier, d'être à l'aise à la maison.
On peut rester au dehors ici jusqu'à 22h, causer jusqu'à ce qu'on ait sommeil pour rentrer se coucher.
Et avant, on venait leur conter les histoires. Le Barça a fait ça, Chelsea a fait ça, le Paris Saint-Germain a fait ça. Mais aujourd'hui, nous sommes au même pied d'égalité d'information.
Mais avec du courant, c'est comme quelque chose qui est sorti dans un trou et puis il commence à s'envoler maintenant.
Ouais, ça a été un progrès pour le village.
Ça a changé notre vie.
The Ivory Coast aims to supply an additional 1 million homes with electricity by the end of 2020, a major challenge for the inclusive and balanced social development of populations throughout the national territory.
Appearing on behalf of CIE is Managing Director, Mr. Amadou Bakioro.
I'm proud and delighted to receive this International Edition Award 2020, which comes as a testimony to the results of our company, in close cooperation with the government, to improve access to electricity. In suburban Africa, several issues restrict access to electricity. Production capacity is not always sufficient, the distribution network doesn't always have the reach, and also the access fee is an issue, as $200 may come as a hefty price for population that lives under $5 a day. Through the POWERPLAN program, Electricity for All program, we defined and financed an innovative scheme that involved pay-as-you-go services that reduce the initial access fee to $2 and that give people up to 10 years to reimburse this access fee. We had to create an entire ecosystem to be able to service those populations in a cost-effective way. Subsequently, the rate of access to electricity almost doubled in a few years. We conducted several social studies which confirmed that even with the low usage of energy in the first stages when people access the program, it impacted their lives, it impacted their health, it impacted the success rate of their children in school. The government decided to accelerate this program through the creation of the POWERPLAN fund. With this fund, new innovative financial schemes will be put in place, including securitization of the debts and other financial mechanisms, to spur the next stages of growth and reach the universal goal of 100% access to electricity in 2030. It's an honor for our staff to be highlighted on the global stage by our peers, and we want to thank the Edison Institute for this recognition. Thank you very much.
For me, it has been an honor to present these prestigious awards. But this year, it is especially rewarding in the face of a global pandemic and so many other challenges. I think we can all take pride in the pioneering spirit of innovation and public service that these awards symbolize. So again, I congratulate all the winners, and we look forward to next year's awards in Las Vegas in June. With that, I know we're all eager to hear about the November elections. I will now turn it over to my colleague, EEI Executive Vice President, Brian Wolf.
Thank you, Tom. I want to add my congratulations as well to the EEI Edison Award winners for 2020. Big accomplishments, big work being done out there, and just want to congratulate them as well. And so I want to thank everyone for tuning in today to this 2020 election colloquy, The Road to November. We're about 60 days to the election, and I'm joined by two of the nation's leading political strategists who will discuss the 2020 presidential elections. And before I introduce our two panelists, I just want to say these folks that I want you to be prepared in your chat box here to be able to provide us some of your questions because we know this is going to be a rich dialogue and we know that you're going to have plenty of them. So feel free to be able to ask questions throughout the session. But now I want to turn my attention and your attention over our two panelists, Jennifer Palmieri and Karl Rove. I am honored to have you hear them discuss, and actually us all have a discussion about political trends and help us really identify what to watch for as we get closer to November 3rd. I mean, I think that there's so many moving pieces that we can all agree in this particular election that are really, we need to stay up to speed on, and we all could do, have a little tutorial about what to watch for, particularly in these next 8 weeks. But it's great to have Jennifer Palmieri with us today. She served as head of communications for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign, and she was also the White House communications director under President Barack Obama. She previously served as the White House deputy press secretary under President Bill Clinton, and she was also national press secretary for the Democratic Party. She's been a frequent contributor to the Washington Post, many other news outlets. I catch her oftentimes on MSNBC on just about every show on there, but she's also an accomplished author. She's written 2 books now, Dear Madam President, and also She Proclaims. So thank you for joining us, Jennifer. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Karl Rove has joined us again today, and actually, Karl, it's great to have you again with us. He had joined us in 2011, and we had opposite Karl, Jim Carville at that time. So we know today is going to be just as interesting as any Karl Rove, Jim Carville show, right, Karl?
Are you suggesting that Jennifer is the equivalent of James Carville? I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't detect a Cajun accent, and she's not half crazy. I mean, please.
There you go. Well,
I am from the Gulf Coast, Karl. You may not know that, but other than that, I'm not half crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, she's the improved, for today, Karl. She's the improved version. But
there we go.
Karl served as senior advisor to President George W. Bush from 2000 to 2007. He was deputy chief of staff from 2004 to 2007. And Karl's been a Fox News contributor. He's really been just on a Daily Beast, Financial Times, Forbes, Newsweek, The Times, Washington Post, Weekly Standard. You name it, Karl's out there all the time, really giving his political, I would say, beyond opinion, his expertise. And we need it now more than ever from both of you, hearing about what's going on in these elections. Karl's also, like Jen, is also an accomplished author of 2 books, The Triumph of William McKinley, which I've read, and also Courage and Consequence. So thank you for joining us, Karl. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
I did want to mention to everyone today, just as I mentioned, we're going to answer questions in a live Q&A chat at the end of this panel. And but again, as I told you, that chat box is open throughout the panel, and start asking away, and we'll take a look at those. I'm going to actually start off with 3 questions for both of you. So I'm going to give you both an opportunity, take turns answering them, but I want you both to answer each question. First one, very predictable because it's a matter of the time that we're in right now. We've seen a shift in really how Americans are living, how we're all working during COVID-19. Give me your thoughts on the overall effect of the pandemic that it's had on just what we all, the 3 of us, know to be campaigning. It's, there's no traditional real campaigning going on, and what little there is we know it's an abbreviated version. So when we talked about what the three of us have seen typically in any campaigns, large rallies, a lot of GOTV, pressing flesh, knocking on doors, getting out in the field and doing that work. And we know now it's turned into socially distanced events and smaller events, more bite-sized type opportunities. And also just even campaign workers and volunteers are having to really look at these campaigns and their activism differently. But give me your thoughts on that. I mean, this is just no campaign like we've seen before in this election cycle. So give me your thoughts. I'll take Jennifer. We'll let you go first.
So I think that voters have adapted to this the way they've adapted to, all the other changes in life during COVID. I was really concerned when this first, when things first started locking down in March and April, and there were a lot of primaries, and how's that going to affect primary turnout? Are people going to still turn out to vote? And what we saw was people still turned out to vote, and they turned out to vote in pretty big numbers. And I know there's concern about voting during a time of COVID and how that's going to impact November. And what I'm finding just in some of the research that I'm privy to and some of the voting work that I work on, people think it's an essential activity the same way they think that grocery shopping is. And in terms of the candidates, I think Biden, for the spring, there was concern, Democrats, we get really worked up and anxious and nervous. And a lot of Democrats are worried about Biden being in his basement, and it worked fine for him for the spring and most of the summer. I think people didn't expect to see that kind of campaigning, but now he is traveling more. I think that is important that he goes to the battleground states, even if you can't do big events, that people are still seeing you come to your state. They're just like that does actually matter. And now he and Trump are sort of trading off place for place. One goes to one, the other follows a few days later. And I think we might see that kind of ping-ponging back and forth. But I think that people have sort of adjusted, but you do lose some of the magic, right? I do, as a campaign professional, if I were the Biden campaign, I would worry about that. Thus far, voters seem to continue to be turning in and taking it as seriously as you would hope.
Right. Carl?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Jen said. I don't think it has affected the enthusiasm of the partisans on either side, and they're going to be energized to turn out and vote, and I think we're seeing that. I do think that she also made Jim made a very good point about how there needs to be some in-person campaigning in these target states. The one thing we know from political scientists studying this endlessly is that a presidential candidate's appearance in a state does have an effect on the vote. That's why, for example, the gross example is Trump went to Wisconsin, Hillary Clinton didn't. He gets a narrow victory out of it. So we're likely to see both candidates having to spend time in some of these critical states. Trump seems to be willing to go out there and do the 1,000-person, 2,000-person rallies at an outdoor airport, at a hangar on an airport. I think Biden's going to be forced to do some of that. So not just simply 10 or 20 people in a room with a, a roundtable discussion. But what I think is going to be really interesting to see is we do know something about the undecided and swing and most of the independent voters, and that is they absorb a lot less information about politics and campaigns than do the partisans. And that's one of the reasons that both campaigns try and do a lot of activity aimed at sort of stuffing information in their face, even if they don't want to accept it. And you can't do it this time around because you can't go hit 6 cities in Ohio and Michigan in one day with gigantic rallies that dominate the media. And you can't have door-to-door people knocking on the door saying, we need you, we're here on behalf of candidate X. And you can't have get out the vote operations that are knocking on doors and pulling people out. We got a van waiting here to take you to the polls. So it's going to be interesting to see. The partisans are going to be there. I think we're going to have a higher than normal turnout simply because of the partisans. But one of the interesting questions will be the people who are less interested in politics, who traditionally sort of float between parties, view themselves as independents, low propensity voters. How are they going to be affected by this?
Right. Let me ask you, that's a great point, Carl, and that kind of makes me think of another smaller question attached to this. If the overall campaign mechanics are different, and that's what both campaigns are going to have to adjust to, how do you then think that any speculation about the overall integrity of the outcome, the integrity of the outcome of the election, because the three of us have seen the conversations in and around the U.S. Postal Service. You have the influx of, we'll have more absentee ballots and early voting than we ever have in this country. What do you think the outcome of that will be, or the overall effect of it? As far as the integrity of the election, I think we're all, the three of us would be in agreement that we may not, most likely not have a winner on election night. Are we all agreeing on that?
I'm not certain I do, and I'll tell you why. And I'm doing a lot of research on this. In fact, by the time that this is shown, I may have published this. Look, I think there are two or three key things. First of all, I want to say I know the Postmaster General. He is a logistics expert. His object is not to screw up the election. It's to make certain that ballots are fully delivered and returned in time. That's why in May, with no controversy, the post office sent out a letter saying, be aware of the delivery deadlines of the post office and don't have too short a turnaround for people to return their ballots. Otherwise, we take between 2 and 5 days to get a piece of mail. Don't say you got to return it within 3 days if we say between 2 and 5. So first of all, I'm not worried about the post office. This is a partisan thing. It's a bunch of baloney in my mind. The post office is going to be able to handle it. This is about this much of what they deliver in a day. If we're talking about 60 million ballots or 70 million ballots cast by mail across the entire United States over a 5 or 6 week period, that is a fraction of what the post office carries. More important to me are two things. One is when those ballots are returned to the election authorities, when are they allowed to begin to verify and validate those ballots? Because that's the time-consuming thing. If you've got a ballot and you've determined that it's legitimate and legal, your ability to count that ballot is very quick. All you do is feed it into the machine. But some states, like the state of New York, excuse me, you cannot begin to validate the ballot until either the election day or when the polls close. Now, states like Florida say you can begin 14 days out. Others allow the state to begin validating the ballot, or the local authorities to validate the ballot when it's received by the local election authorities. So they make certain that that is a real person and so forth, and then they can set it aside and count it on election day. The states that don't do that, the states that say you got to wait until the election day, those are the ones. So the question is going to be New York, for example. In New York, they don't allow you to do it until the polls close. So we're not going to know the outcome in New York, but I bet you this, I bet you Joe Biden carries New York. So if on election night, we've got most of the states that are sitting there still out are not close states like an Arizona or a Florida or a Wisconsin or a Pennsylvania or Michigan. If it's in New York and a California, then we'll be okay. But we are going to have problems like that. There are going to be local contests that are not decided for a long time because these states are trying to do what they should have spent a lot of time doing. There was a conference call earlier this year among secretaries of state, led by the Secretary of State of Washington, Republican, Secretary of State, Oregon, Democrat. Both those states vote by mail. And both of them said to their other colleagues around the country, 48 other states and the District of Columbia, if you're not already casting 60% of your ballots by mail, don't try and do a vote by mail this year, because it takes time to put in place the equipment, the procedures, the policies, and the training necessary to execute that. It took Washington State 5 years to put in place mail-in ballot, and we're now trying to do it in 5 and 6 months in some instances. Other point. I worry about mailing out ballots to, quote, inactive voters. Under HAVA, the Helping America Vote Act, passed by a huge bipartisan majority in 2001, states were required to periodically purge their voter list of people who are inactive. That means that you've not voted in at least the last 6 years in most states, and in many states even longer than that. And you have to have sent a piece of mail to that address to say, in essence, are you there? And the post office has to have returned it saying, addressee unknown. Let me give you one example. Clark County, Nevada, Las Vegas. The county commission said we want to send ballots for the primary to all inactive voters. The Democrat election chief said, don't do that. It's wasted money. And we got 200,000 ballots out there that are going to people who no longer exist. And we know they no longer exist. commission overrode him, made him do it, and what happened? They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to mail out 200,000 ballots, and those ballots, by and large, mostly came back. Some of them lingered on top of the mailboxes at the apartment complex, and one postal clerk was heard to say, my God, what are we doing? We have thousands of ballots here literally sitting in our office, in our post office, and they're unsecured. That's what I really do worry about, because on the margin in a close state, if you're mailing in active voters, even in local contests where a small number of votes may differentiate the winner and the loser, that could be a problem. Those are the two things I worry about. But otherwise, you know, states that have done this like Texas and Florida, Florida's going to be able to handle this. Don't worry about it. Even if it's an increased number, they're going to be able to handle it because they've seen it coming and they're prepared for it. But states like New York and California, which just, I mean, think about this. The California in the primary said, we're going to abolish precinct polling locations and we're going to send mail-in ballots, mail-out ballots to everybody. And if you want to vote on election day, you got to drive to downtown Los Angeles to vote, or downtown Santa Ana in Orange County. And we're going to mail out the ballots in such a way that didn't guarantee that they arrived in time and returned in time.
All right, Jen, that's a lot to unpack there. But what are your thoughts?
I could follow along though, because I work on this issue, so I understood it all. The only thing I would add is, I mean, I know you're going to find some partisan divide on my reaction to some of the things on, you know, on inactive voters and court cases in Nevada and California about that. But there are other court cases. The question of, can ballots arrive on election day, and there's questions about, Carl, so the questions about ballots being able to be counted prior to election day, and then there's questions about ballots being received, you know, postmarked on election day but counted afterwards. And some states allow that, some don't. There's a lot of lots of lawsuits. There's a lot of legal activity on both these questions, and there will be between now and election day. So there may be you know, it may be a little more complicated on election night. I mean, I suspect, because it'll be close probably too, that you won't be declaring victors on election night unless there's like monster turnout for Biden.
Right, not close. Yeah, I agree. All right, so let me ask you this, because the three questions, my first questions here, have all been about, right, pandemic effect, right? Like, what are these, you know, as far as the infrastructure of elections? Right. Give me your thoughts, just though, on another kind of curveball that's been thrown in the pandemic, which is the ongoing, nothing new, but the ongoing racial justice issues that we have in this country. And they're really front and center right now. We got protests going on in a number of states. We just recently had again, the March on Washington. So how do you anticipate Trump and Biden are going to really speak to those issues, because they're so important, and we have these debates coming up later this month? How do you think they're going to really address those issues, you know, in a way that brings in some of their interactions around the country that they've had, but also their views and party views related to this? Jen, you want to give it a go?
Yeah, I don't think Biden wanted this fight, but he's in it now. You know, he's in it. And at least in early September, it looks like that's going to be a big issue between now and the election day. I do work with The Circus, a show on Showtime about it's like a weekly documentary series about the campaign, and talked with Kellyanne Conway the week of the Republican convention. And, you know, this is, they have a monster gender gap right now. They're losing badly to Biden with women, and they've had a strategy, in my view, to try to scare them. And they've run 3 series of ads about crime and try to move their numbers on women. That has not moved. Now with, you know, the shooting in Kenosha, 2 people were killed in Kenosha, the shooting in Portland, where a protester was killed, this is really amping up, and you see Trump is putting like all of his effort into pushing this message. And I don't think that the Biden campaign relished having to get into this, but they see that it is an existential threat in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, possibly Michigan. I think it's a very serious threat. And, you know, I know how it feels to be on a campaign where you're winning and you get a little too cautious. And I think that with the Biden campaign, it's sort of a relief, almost like we know we have to fight this out. And Biden has a pretty effective message, which is, this is Trump's America. You know, these things were not happening when Barack Obama was president and I was vice president. He is stoking fear. We had Kellyanne Conway said the quiet part out loud again during the Republican Convention week, where she said, like, this is good for us to have these kinds of rioting. And I think, and the other thing that's interesting about what we've seen Biden do in response to these kinds of attacks is he's saying back, he's parroting back Trump's attacks on him. He's saying, do I look like a radical left-wing socialist? Really? He says that in Joe Biden's America, this is going to happen. And I think it's smart, it's unconventional for a campaign to respond that directly, repeat back from the candidate's mouth the charge. But I think it's the right thing for Biden to do because Trump is so ubiquitous. And fear is really powerful. It's a really powerful force. But Biden is a pretty convincing messenger. I mean, I think like that's the open question. If this fails, you know, by the debates, that it's not moving voters, you may see Trump move to something else. But right now, it really does feel pretty center to the race, that issue.
Right. Karl?
Yeah, I'm mystified why Biden has let it become center to the campaign. Let's go back a couple of weeks when the U.S. presence, the U.S. federal government presence in Portland was reduced. When the Oregon State Police came in, that was a moment for Biden to have said, you know what we've seen, the attempt to burn down the federal courthouse in Portland is terrible. That should not be done. That's violence, and it dishonors the memory of the man after whom that federal courthouse is named, who is my friend and served with me in the United States Senate, a Republican. And we should all join in condemning, and I'm certain that the vast majority of peaceful protesters thronging America's streets in outrage over the death of George Floyd and other acts of racial injustice will join me in condemning that kind of violence. But instead, he let it pass. And now he's trying to say, well, the violence is bad, but it's not my fault. It's the fault of Donald Trump. Well, most people don't blame Biden for that violence. They don't blame Trump either. What they blame is the people who are conducting the violence. So I think it's going to continue to be an issue. And I think these weak-kneed mayors in Seattle, we're going to have a summer of love for the chop zone. You know, the mayor in Portland who goes one way and then goes another way, is now condemning the violence, but trying to blame it on Trump in order to save his own election this fall from a candidate coming at him from the left. The swing voters are going to look at this and say, you know what? The question is, Trump didn't cause it, Biden didn't cause it, but which one of them is standing with the police and condemning consistently the violence that we're seeing play out on our screens? And I mean, you cannot look at that footage of that man being dragged out of his pickup truck in Portland and having his head viciously kicked by a, quote, security member. Talk about police violence, private police violence conducted on that poor guy. And you can't look at the execution of that Trump supporter who made the stupid mistake of showing up in Portland in a counter protest. He was executed, shot in the back by a violent extremist. And, you know, this frightens the ordinary Americans. And yet Biden could have stood up. There's a majority in this country that believes two things. These protests, peaceful protests over these needless and brutal deaths of Black men at the hands of the police, are justified, and nothing justifies the violence that we're seeing played out on our screens. Biden is the one guy who's better positioned than Trump is to say, I'm on both sides of this equation. These protests are justified, but peaceful protests, not violent protests, and we must all join together as a country and condemn the violence. But he won't do it. He does the first readily and the second only weakly.
Right. Well, totally, both of you, great perspectives on something that's really been right in front of us during this pandemic, certainly, and will continue to be. I want to switch gears just for a second. Jennifer, you know, in your book, Dear Madam President, you actually really talked about the evolution of women in politics, but it was really women in politics in higher office. it was really about the rare air, you know, for men and women, regardless. But for women, talk about what you think the obstacles are really going to be around Kamala Harris and being the first, really the second female candidate to be to run for vice president in that role, but also how it might reshape, you know, politics going forward and elections going forward. What advice would you give her that you've noticed, particularly from your 2016 experience, but also many points you brought off in your book?
The most important thing I can say is I think the most illuminating thing I can say is I did not expect it to be that hard or that big of a deal to elect the first woman president. When I worked for Hillary Clinton, when I started in 2015, I just thought Hillary was the best person for the job. And we had elected the first Black president, and I thought in America that was like a higher hurdle than the first woman president. And then when I got there was, even though I had lived through 8 years of Bill Clinton's presidency and 4 years with Barack Obama, I'm really battle tested. Karl will agree, I am super battle tested, but this was something, the sort of vitriol that we had coming at her was something I had not experienced. And what I didn't appreciate was, I mean, sure, you can disagree with her or, not want to vote for her for lots of valid reasons. But what I think what hung around people is just a sense of like not something, there being something about her they didn't like. There's something about her I just don't trust. There's suspicion around her. There had been for decades. I believe that's because she was always sort of stepping outside of the role that a woman normally played. And, in her case, there was a lot of armor that built up as a result to that and made, like life was more difficult than it needed to be in 16 for all of those reasons. But what I do see progress being made. It's very important. Role models are very important. It really hindered us that we did not have in our minds, our collective minds in the country, what it looked like for a woman to be president of the United States. And being compared to a man, expected to behave like a man, but then finding her inauthentic, which she did, you can see how this can be a pretty vicious cycle. For Harris, I think it's a little better. It's not great yet. I mean, you saw we had 6 women run this time on the Democratic side for the Democratic primary. They still encountered questions like, how are you going to deal with the likability question? How are you going to deal with the electability question? And Harris's own, when she was being considered as vice president, people would say, there was some criticism that she was too ambitious because she had wanted to be president, that she couldn't be a loyal vice president to Biden, even though Biden had also run against Barack Obama and was a very loyal vice president to Barack Obama for 8 years. He was able to put all that frightful ambition aside. The good news is Kamala Harris got selected anyway, right? So these things are still in our minds. I think and you saw the first week, people questioning Kamala Harris's citizenship if she was born in this country. We're a little more attuned to some of these tropes, and so I think that does make it easier for her. She'll still battle this stuff, but she's somebody who, for her whole life, has had to be very aggressive in defining who she is. So I think she's sort of less vulnerable to some of these to some of these criticisms. She handles them really well, and thus far it's been I think she's managed it all great. It's important if she wins. Role models really do matter, and to see a woman in that job, to see a Black woman in that job, it's a groundbreaking thing, and it's not just about breaking glass ceilings. It's imagining. It's having little boys, little girls see that's part of what it looks like to be a leader in America. And I think that's an important moment.
That's a very good point. Karl, I just wanted to ask you that you did a couple of interviews more recently where you actually talked about what President Trump really needed to be able to do with regards to accepting the nomination, and what was he going to really do to lay out what a second act of Donald Trump would look like. Give us your perspective on how do you think he did in accepting the nomination? How do you think he did with laying out a plan of what he would do in a second term?
Well, it's not only laying it out, but it's following through on discussing it through the balance of the campaign. They laid out a long laundry list of items on Sunday night that were part of his second term agenda. And then they talked about him in the speech. And it was about roughly 10, 11% of the total speech was devoted to the second term agenda. Now, it may not sound like much, and I would have liked to have had more of that, but it's actually more than we got out of the Biden acceptance speech the week previously, in which he basically ran through a very short list he's got 110 pages of Unity Commission recommendations, but he condensed it down to about 7 or 8% of his speech was devoted to that and ran through a quick laundry list. Neither man has done, in my opinion, a particularly good job of laying out what, from a policy perspective, the next 4 years would look like. Biden has most of his campaign built around the idea of, I'm going to be different than the guy that it's in there. I'm going to be normal. And so in a way, he's sort of hanging it on a meta theme of, I'm not going to be acting. You're not going to wake up to read my morning tweet, for example. But it was a start, but but in my opinion, a lot more is needed. Now, in fairness, a couple of my friends have said to me, well, he did embody some of his agenda when he described the contrast between he and Biden. So he was talking about his second term. I'm going to do this because I'm not agreeing with Biden on that. And I accept that there's some of that. But this election is not being fought between two guys who have laid out and visibly defended a second term agenda. They've each in their own way downplayed it. Biden by agreeing to the Unity Commission recommendations and then sort of, not making that really part and parcel of what he goes forward each day talking about. And Trump by laying it out in a relatively long document on Sunday night and then giving it a minority in his speech. Most of his speech was devoted, the biggest chunk in it, about 20 some odd % of it, was devoted to a defense of American values and American exceptionalism. The second biggest chunk was what we've just been talking about a few minutes ago, law and order and the violence in America's major cities.
Right. Let me ask you both something.
Can I say one quick thing? Let me agree with Jen put her finger on it. Women in office. Think about this. Out of the last 5 secretaries of state of the United States, or excuse me, the last 6 secretaries of state of the United States, 3 have been women. Madeleine Albright made it possible for people to sort of get more comfortable with the notion of Condi Rice as Secretary of State, which made it more comfortable for people to see Hillary Clinton. And I think the same thing will happen if Biden gets elected. One of the most powerful things he could do is appoint Michelle Flournoy as Secretary of Defense, as the first woman to be Secretary of Defense. Because again, we'd go through the same sort of thing where, Madeleine Albright was Secretary of State. It's not just the little kids, all of us imbibe that, and it makes us, more accepting of seeing the same thing happen again.
I had a friend of mine when John Kerry was selected to be Secretary of State after Hillary left. One little girl whose mom I worked at the White House said, but I thought only girls could be Secretaries of State. But yeah, so this is good. Can I say something, Brian, about Biden's speech from the convention?
Sure.
It was, I think Karl makes a fair point that it was short on specifics, but I think in that frame, I think the Democrats did a good job in using the time that they had well, right? I think Biden's speech was a little less than 20 minutes or around 20 minutes in terms of holding people's attention and really connecting with them, which is what you want your candidate to do. I think that he really accomplished that, and you have to give up. I'd like to see a more specific vision of and here is where we hear Build Back Better. You sort of understand what that means from Biden, but I think where are you going? Where do I fit into America? Where's this country heading, and where am I going to fit in? How is my family going to be a part of that and be able to succeed? I think in the next 60 days, you want to see more of that. But it's also true that we are sort of facing existential questions in the country, and the choice between the two of them, although they look very similar, there's a very stark choice there. And I'm not sure that this election is ever going to get very specific on issues, and it just may be fought out at a more gut level.
Right.
Both parties did an excellent job of making their case at their conventions. They each had a different approach to it, but I was really impressed with how the Democrats came out and sort of used I call it the Hollywood Squares format to sort of make their issue. And the Republicans came out and it looked sort of like the Golden Globe Awards, but each one of them, I thought, did a good job of showcasing some of their talent. And remarkably good presentations by both of them.
I thought the Republican convention was very effective, and it frightened me. Except I didn't find Trump's, and then Trump was surprisingly, in my view, not that effective, and not effective in defining Biden. I thought he would have a sharper, more disciplined attack. Something that was grounded in one argument. He had a couple different arguments, but I thought the Republicans did a good job telling a story I didn't want to hear, but it was well done.
Yeah, they tend to. I've just noticed that, whether it was the State of the Union or, that particular event, accepting the nomination, the production value, I think we can all agree, is disruptive and a different production, right? For sure. We have blown through this time, you two. I think that we've managed to cover so much ground here that we're already out of time. So I just want to be able to segue and wrap up our session and thank both you, Jennifer and Karl, for a great conversation. I really think the things that we were able to cover are really the issues that are front and center of every American's mind as we approach this last 60 days of this election. But all three of us are going to be available for a live Q&A chat in just a moment. And I do want to remind everyone that we'll have another series of breakouts starting at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, followed by our closing general session at 3 p.m. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Kuhn, president of the Edison Electric Institute. Welcome back to day 2 of EEI 2020, a virtual leadership summit. I hope you were able to be with us for day 1 yesterday, but if not, please visit our virtual conference center, where you will find all the content archived for your viewing convenience. Before we begin, I want to pause and recognize the sponsors of this session, Oracle Utilities and POWERPLAN. Their generous support helps make this possible. Please visit our sponsor wall for more details. We have a terrific political conversation just moments away. But first, we have the important task of presenting the annual EEI Edison Awards. This is our industry's highest honor. It is given to recognize distinguished leadership, innovation, and advancement of the electric industry. The first Edison Award was given in 1922, and the international category was added in 1994. Earlier this year, our reviewers examined dozens of nominations, and we ended up with the 5 domestic and 2 international finalists shown on the screen. All the projects were innovative, which made this a tough call for our judging panel of retired EEI chairmen. In the end, they selected 1 domestic and 2 international companies as this year's winners.
Great, I think that does that. And then there was the Stansby line. Let me find that for you.
That's an ATCO.
There we go.
And it should be pronounced Stansby.
Right.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
I'm going to ditch Mr. I just don't think we need to say that anyway. But what do you, Jim?
It's fine, Tom.
Yeah.
I guess I was just kind of reverting to that international thing where you.
Okay, right. Okay.
But if we don't say Mr.
That's right.
Wayne, it seems
Yeah.
wrong. Yeah.
Accepting on behalf of ATCO is Mr. Wayne Stensby, Executive Vice President.
Perfect.
I did it.
All right, let's get over back to, bear with me here. And well, while we're picking things up, anybody who was listening, the pronunciation.
I'll do it one more time. How's that?
Yeah. I wasn't sure one way or the other, so maybe you just do it one more just in case. Whenever you're ready.
Accepting on behalf of CIE is Managing Director, Mr. Amadou Bakayoro.
Great. Okay, now we move on to the next general session. So you've got some closing remarks for this particular session.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and mute myself. Whenever you're ready, you can just go for it.
All right. That wraps up our session. What a great conversation, and I want to thank Karl and Jennifer for a stimulating and okay, don't publish that one. All right. That wraps up our session. What a great conversation, and I want to thank Karl and Jennifer for a stimulating and provocative glimpse into what we can expect in the days ahead before we all go to the polls. All 3 of us will be available for a live Q&A chat in just a moment. I do want to remind everyone that we will have another series of breakouts starting at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, followed by our closing general session at 3 p.m. Thank you.
Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
I may have screwed something up.
All 3 of us?
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, Team Freeman. I guess I sort of forgot that was still in there.
The 3 of them.
Because I think maybe what we should do is just not, with all due respect, Tom, is maybe we can just leave that in there, but I think we should probably just let Brian Wolf do that. What do you think? What do you think, Steve? Because he's going to be moderating. It might feel a little bit weird for Tom to come back in and do a benediction for something that Brian just moderated.
And do you want to say that wraps up our session when you're going to have the Q&A?
Well, we're kind of more comfortable with that because there are, because if the way we've been doing it, Tom, is we say, that brings this session to a close, and then without missing a beat, please stay around for the live chat that starts now.
Well, let me just take up that wraps up our session. Just so.
Yeah, well, you know what? Why don't you,
but Brian can do all this. Right?
He can do all this, but you know what? Just since you're here and we're all here, just go ahead and we'll have that in the can, and if for any reason we need
gotcha.
to.
All right, terrific.
Sorry to interrupt.
So just say Brian and Carl and Jennifer will be available.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. For the live chat. Thank you.
I want to thank Carl and Jennifer for a tremendous conversation and a stimulating and provocative glimpse into what we can expect in the days ahead before we go to the polls. Carl and Jennifer and Brian will be available for a live Q&A chat in just a moment. I do want to remind everyone that we will have another series of breakouts starting at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, followed by our closing general session at 3 p.m. Thank you for your participation.
Okay, next up is our closing session where you have some opening remarks and then some closing remarks.
Okay.
All right, so I'll just mute myself, and whenever you're ready, you can just go for it.
Hello, I'm Tom Kuhn, President of EEI. We are now at the conclusion of our EEI's Virtual Leadership Summit. I hope everyone has enjoyed it and found it valuable. I want to extend our special thanks to Oracle Utilities and Utilities International for sponsoring this closing session, and to all our sponsors for their support, which has allowed us to offer the valuable content free of charge. As a reminder, our entire summit will be available online for the next 30 days. Please encourage your colleagues who do not attend to drop by our virtual conference center and check it out. There is no better way for us to stay connected while the pandemic lingers. Our closing session traditionally brings together the CEO leadership of EEI, which has been a crowd favorite at past conventions. It's a privilege for me to introduce the leaders of EEI. Before we start, I want to pause to recognize a man who has been a tremendous leader for our industry and for EEI, Chris Crane, our immediate past chairman. When we had to cancel our meeting in Austin in June, we were deprived of the customary passing of the leadership baton on the big stage. So we will have to make it do here in the digital world. Rest assured, Chris is the real deal, a leader who gets the job done and inspires us all to be better. Being elected EEI chairman is a major tribute. It says you have the respect and admiration of your peers, and as chair, Chris has presided admirably over many challenges, including the early days of this terrible pandemic. I know we can't do a standing ovation, but I do hope everyone tuning in will send good thoughts to my friend and a great champion for our industry, Chris Crane. You already have met the new boss, EEI Chairman Ben Folk. He has a supremely capable cabinet of vice chairs, Jerry Anderson of DTE Energy, Warner Baxter of Ameren, and Pedro Pizarro of Edison International. So with that, let me turn it over to Chris, who will moderate our closing general session roundtable.
Perfect. There's one more bit here. I don't know if anyone else has comments or anything on what was just read, but it seemed good to me personally.
Okay. Once again, it's me that's complaining, right? In the second paragraph, Tom read the instead of this, if that matters to anybody. And then there was a little hitch in my audio around customary passing and make do here.
Yeah, let's do one. Let's do one more.
Yeah, if we do another one, we'll have a clean read all the way.
Yeah.
No worries. Okay, I'm taking it to the top of all that. And Steve, just so you know, any hitch in the audio you hear is a Zoom thing, and that won't come across in the actual recording we're doing to the camera. So no worries about that. Okay, sir, whenever you're ready.
Hello, I'm Tom Kuhn, President of EEI. We are now at the conclusion of our EEI's Virtual Leadership Summit. I hope everyone has enjoyed it and found it valuable. I want to extend our special thanks to Oracle Utilities and Utilities International for sponsoring this closing session, and to all our sponsors for their support, which has allowed us to offer this valuable content free of charge. As a reminder, our entire summit will be available online for the next 30 days. Please encourage your colleagues who did not attend to drop by our virtual conference center and check it out. There is no better way for us to stay connected while the pandemic lingers. Our closing session traditionally brings together the CEO leadership of EEI, which has been a crowd favorite at past conventions. It's a privilege for me to introduce the leaders of EEI. Before we start, I want to pause to recognize a man who has been a tremendous leader for our industry and for EEI, Chris Crane, our immediate past chairman. When we had to cancel our meeting in Austin in June, we were deprived of the customary passing of the leadership baton on the big stage, so we will have to make it do here in the digital world. Rest assured, Chris is the real deal, a leader who gets the job done and inspires us all to be better. Being elected EEI chairman is a major tribute. It says you have the respect and admiration of your peers. As chair, Chris presided admirably over many challenges, including the early days of this terrible pandemic. I know we can't do a standing ovation, but I do hope everyone tuning in will send good thoughts to my friend and a great champion for our industry, Chris Crane. You already have met the new boss, EEI Chairman Ben Folk. He has a supremely capable cabinet of vice chairs, Jerry Anderson of DTE Energy, Warner Baxter of Amaran, and Pedro Pizarro of Edison International. So with that, let me turn it over to Chris, who will moderate our closing general session roundtable.
Perfect. Okay, so unless anyone objects, we can move on to the very final thing. These are just your closing remarks here for the closing general session. So it's just one slide here. So whenever you're ready, I'll mute myself.
That brings us almost to the end of EEI 2020, a virtual leadership summit. I want to thank everyone for joining us for our maiden voyage into the digital world, and I hope you have found it worthwhile. I also want to thank all our sponsors again for their important support. Naturally, we do not know what the future holds, but I do know that I sincerely hope to see all of you again next June in Las Vegas for EEI 2021. In the meantime, please be safe, and we'll be in touch. At this point, the post-session live chat will begin. Thank you very much.
Okay. How's everyone feel?
Now again, you don't think we should come in after the post-session live chat?
Hey, Melissa, can you come over here? I just wonder, hey, Steve?
Yes.
What is your opinion about that? Because I guess I just wonder if anybody will still, how that would...
We'll still be there?
Well, I was trying to think of different words.
No, that's a nice word.
I mean, Steve, what do you think?
Well, the way the live chat works, Tom, it is a little bit weird for something to come in on the back of it because people are interactively asking questions and stuff. I guess the way they would look at it is, okay, they're turning this off. I don't know. That's why we had you read this.
Okay.
Actually, that's a good point because it's all going to be typing and yeah.
Oh, and the timing would be difficult.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, it sounded good.
I thought
if you want to do it a different way, you could always just have one in the box if you want to change it.
Well, I guess we could,
go
sure.
afterwards.
We could put one in the box.
Yeah, it'd be safest if you.
It wouldn't hurt. Yeah.
Let me just tape one that way.
Tom, you're thinking like a producer,
right.
man.
Yep.
You're just like a producer, dude.
We'll just play it right at the.
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of EEI 2020, a virtual leadership summit. I want to thank everyone for joining us for our maiden voyage into the digital world, and I hope you have found it worthwhile. I also want to thank all our sponsors again for their important support. Naturally, we do not know what the future holds, but I do know that I sincerely hope to see all of you again next June in Las Vegas for EEI 2021. In the meantime, please be safe, and we'll be in touch. Thank you very much. One more time.
Okay.
That brings us all. That brings us to the end of EEI 2020, a virtual leadership summit. I want to thank everyone for joining us for our maiden voyage into the digital world. All right, let's start that over again. That brings us to the end of EEI 2020, a virtual leadership summit. I want to thank everyone for joining us for our maiden voyage into the digital world, and I hope you have found it worthwhile. I also want to thank all our sponsors again for their important support. Naturally, we do not know what the future holds, but I do know that I sincerely hope to see all of you again next June in Las Vegas for EEI 2021. In the meantime, please be safe, and we'll be in touch. Thank you very much.
Great.
Okay.
Good. All right. Thank you so much, sir. That was you just put on a clinic.
Terrific.
I think we're good. We got everything in the can, so.
You guys relaxed now?
Totally. No, we're not relaxed. No. Well,
Okay, Bill, thank you. You guys are great.
those guys
Appreciate
are
it.
great, Tom.
Mike, thank you.
The whole team.
Happy to help.
Those
All
guys,
right.
those guys. Thank you, guys. We'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So this young man, Mike McKenzie, he is the spawn of Mac McKenzie, who is kind of the lead Freeman guy and has known Melissa forever. And he's sort of along with Melissa, they're the brains behind all of this.
Fantastic.
I'm totally not the
That's
brains.
our hippie looking guy that you see with the long hair and the
Oh, wait, well,
ponytail.
I gotta tell you, I'm a, Harley guy, so I wanna, my aspiration is when I get finished
When you're done with all this,
this
yeah.
job, I'm gonna go out and,
Absolutely.
I'm
Oh,
gonna
do you
go
still
out.
have your bike?
I'm gonna go out and live free, huh?
Do you still have your Harley?
I'm riding it more than ever now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wendy lets you ride it around the
Born
compound.
free, free as the wind blows, free as the grass grows.
All right, I'm going to cut here, Bill.
Sounds good. Thank you.